if a clip is circling the internet enough, that tells me enough people are interested in it, and the message that that content pushes should be enough. Maybe it's not the complete picture, but it's enough to communicate a vibe of the collective opinion of that person.
Young adult males in the blue wall swing states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are garnering a lot of attention in this election. When we spoke to one group leaning towards Harris and another leaning towards Trump, three things became immediately clear. One is that their political news consumption is dominated by social media rather than traditional media sources, especially for the Trump leaners. And that's good enough for them. The second is that support for Harris is driven mostly by an antipathy toward Trump, while support for Trump is split between an aversion to Harris and widespread support for Trump's economic and foreign policies. The third is that despite merely leaning towards one candidate rather than being all in, none of these 15 respondents are willing to consider the other party's candidate. Let's start by talking about where Trump leaners get their news and information about Vice President Harris. I'm curious to know what you've been hearing about Harris and Trump. So please think for a moment and tell me the most recent thing you've heard about Vice President Harris. And if you can remember where you heard it.
I heard she had a bad track record in her time as the prosecutor in San Francisco.
Where'd you hear it?
Instagram or Twitter, I think.
Recent thing I saw was on Twitter, and it was just something about Kamala and Diddy, some of her tweets and some endorsements he gave her and stuff.
Mine is I just saw on Twitter, Tim Waltz was talking about how the country can't go through 4 more years of what we've been going through, which directly correlates to Harris.
On Instagram, I saw a side-by-side compilation of her discussing her opinion on guns. And in one clip, she claimed to be a self-professed gun owner and was not going to take anyone's guns away. And then, of course, in the other clip, she said the exact opposite and, in fact, seemed to suggest that she would invite herself into your home, which violates the Constitution.
Not genuine.
Remember where you heard that?
On social media.
Okay. Remember where in social media?
Maybe Twitter.
And here's where Harris leaners got most of their recent news and information about her. And notice the difference in terms of the sources.
It was on one of those commercial TV commercials, and it was about how she's a DA that just was a DA that just let criminals back out on the streets.
I guess like most recent thing I saw about her was this interview she did with a news reporter in I think Philadelphia. Was just talking about how, what she would do that like I guess help the economy.
Remember which news source it was from, but an article about the relationship between her and I'm going to say her Guilfoyle, Donald Trump Jr.'s current wife, and Gavin Newsom's ex-wife.
An opposition ad.
Okay. It was on TV or the internet, do you remember?
Yeah, it was on TV.
I probably got about 7 to 10 op-eds last night during the Monday Night Football game. I would say most were opposition ads. There were maybe 1 or 2 pro Kamala ads.
All 7 Harris leaners said their vote would be driven much more by their opposition to Trump than in their support for her.
I think the endorsement of Kamala Harris seems more like a rejection of Donald Trump, and the rejection of Donald Trump in the current Republican Party comes from like a few, either you call them beliefs or topics that I feel strongly about, like LGBT rights, reproductive rights. So it makes it impossible to support anyone currently in the Republican Party.
Jake, how'd you end up with Harris?
The Republican Party in this day and age, they seem to want to take the country backwards in some ways, and they have like overall not shown any sort of actual like care about any of the citizens of this country, like of any besides like the super wealthy ones. It feels like a lesser of two evils type of situation.
I feel like I had to look at it from like a utilitarian standpoint and say, we're stuck in this two-party system where I unfortunately can't really vote in a way that's in alignment with what my values actually are. I have to vote in a way that looks to see which candidate is going to essentially enact less damage, and in this case, it would be Kamala.
I feel like it's just Kamala Harris is like a step in the right, just a step in the right direction, even if it is like a small step. I extremely dislike MAGA politics, and a lot of the Republican Party is like basically that that extremeness, and I dislike it a lot, and I feel like Kamala Harris would just be um, it does kind of fall into like the lesser of the two evils, but I feel like there's a little bit more promise with her.
Like they were saying, it's kind of feels like a lesser of two evil situation, or just pick who you dislike the least.
You heard voters who leaned towards Harris describe their choice as a lesser of two evils. In contrast, none of the 8 Trump leaners used that phrase to describe their preferences. While clear-eyed about Trump's shortcomings, which they articulated many times, 4 Trump leaners said they support Trump because they like him. The other 4 support Trump mainly because they oppose Harris. What attracts them to Trump?
Yeah, I think for me, at the end of it, I was looking at it, just honestly speaking, like selfishly, if which president's going to actually make my life better, whether it's as economically, in terms of curbing inflation or better job opportunities or tax breaks. I was just able to look at objectively which president's going to have a closer achievement to be able to help my life become better economically.
Selfishly speaking, my life was better back when he was in office than currently, both monetarily wise, I think, like geopolitically wise, things like that. And also, I just feel like I trust him more.
Why do you trust him more?
Because I feel like when he was in office, I feel like there wasn't as much world conflict. I feel like things were getting done, such as, I don't know, interest rates were at all-time low. The housing market was doing fine.
For me, I just like the way he handled international conflict. I believe the things that are happening in Israel would not have happened if he was president currently. And I also believe the same thing about the Ukrainian-Russian war as well. And I'm just concerned that with Harris, like, and not having Trump, that we're going to be ending up being the international police as usual and having to enter one of those 2 conflicts. And I believe like before that, the United States and the whole world was a bit safer, just having Donald Trump doing the diplomacy for the United States.
I strongly agree with what folks have said about the international conflicts. Just looking at what's been happening even with Putin's been saying over in Russia, he's mocking us, encouraging us to elect Harris. That should speak for itself. We're not going in a good direction internationally. The international community is laughing at us. Under Trump, sure, maybe he's crass or whatever it may be, but he got things done, brokered peace, shook hands with the North Koreans, something unfathomable before. There was peace in the Middle East.
This nostalgia for better times under Trump was driven home when I asked the Trump leaners to describe in a word or a phrase what life was like in America while he was president.
Prosperity.
Stable.
Peace of mind.
Stability.
Yeah, stable was the word I thought of.
Affordable.
Stable.
All right.
Stable.
In contrast, here's how the Harris leaners recalled the Trump years.
Unbalanced.
Hectic.
Dystopian.
Uncertain.
Anxiety-ridden.
Frustrating.
Confusing.
So while the 2 groups recall the Trump years very differently, the way they recall the Biden years is not nearly as far apart. Here's how the Harris leaners recall Biden's presidency and America during this time.
Still confusing.
Unfortunate.
Uninspiring.
All over the place.
Chaotic.
Stable.
Uneventful.
And here's how the Trump leaners recall America during the Biden years?
Chaos.
Worrisome.
Unstable.
Unstable.
Angst ridden.
A joke.
Expensive.
12 of the 15 respondents think their generation has it harder than prior generations did when those generations were their age. Most of them cite the economic challenges their generation faces, which was a particular concern of the Trump leaners. That said, when asked to describe their own generation in a word or phrase, Harris leaners were a bit more critical than the Trump leaners. Here are the Harris leaners first.
Unmotivated.
Overstimulated.
Burnt out.
Connected.
Hopeless.
Social.
Emboldened.
And here are the Trump leaners describing their generation.
Tech savvy.
Tech savvy, got it.
I was just gonna say savvy.
I would say resilient.
I was gonna say savvy as well.
Privileged.
Driven, but limited potential.
Unfortunate.
I would say like technologically damaged.
One final observation. All 7 Harris leaners said the biggest threat to their long-term future was environmental, and most cited climate change. For the 8 Trump leaners, concern was split among economic worries, political division, and the future of AI. Thank you for joining us again this month. Please forward this link to a friend, and please join us again next month.